Started. Chair, it started. You can.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I want to remind everybody that this meeting is being live streamed on the internet for live and subsequent broadcasts. The press and public can record, take photos if they wish to, except where the private and confidential items on the agenda. Are there any apologies? We received one apology from Councillor Ahmed, who is replacing Councillor Perks. And any other apologies?
The Conservative group is here in its entirety, as I suspect the Lib Dem group is.
I am, yes.
Yes.
Declaration of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and other residual interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosure pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not participate in any discussion or vote on the matter and must not remain in the room unless they have been granted dispensation. If other residual interests are declared, a member may speak on the matter only if members of the public are allowed to speak at the meeting, but otherwise must not take any part in any discussion or vote on the matter and must not remain in the room unless they have been granted a dispensation. If it is a sensitive interest, members do not have to disclose the nature of the interest, just they have to declare an interest. Information on the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct is set out on the website. This includes Appendix 1, a flowchart which provides a simple guide to declaring interests at the meetings. This is a call-in meeting.
Have you got any declarations of interest?
Yes, please. I am the ward councillor for Bramham Community where some of this affects. However, I will be listening to all of you before I make up my mind, and I was not in any way in the cabinet or anything to vote on it. So the advice I've had from the monitoring officer is it's fine for me to attend. Yeah.
Any other? No?
Well, I will listen to the city solicitor, but as we all heard yesterday, as the Shadow Cabinet Member for Transport, I presented a petition that is referred to in the documents. I don't believe that is a disqualifying interest.
Yes. As Councillor Barker mentioned, the Assistant Director, Deputy Monitoring Officer has taken a view on the issue, has taken into consideration all those factors, and has concluded that Councillor Barker doesn't have any form of prejudicial interest that would prevent his involvement in today's meeting.
That wasn't my point, Senior Solicitor. My point was that I presented a petition as the Shadow Cabinet Member for Transport, which is referred to in the documentation before us today, and I was saying I don't believe that to be a disqualifying interest.
That's correct. In your case, that's certainly not a disqualifying interest for the purposes of today's business, and in the case of Councillor Barker, sorry, I did misunderstand the question. Just to concur with the comments that were already made, there are, from a governance perspective, no reasons why either of those members shouldn't participate today.
So we have two requests for calling of the cabinet decisions. Active Travel Fund Tranche 2 and Clean Air Zone revenues. We will consider Active Travel first, followed by the Clean Air Zone. The both call-ins were submitted by the same councillors, Councillors Adam Higgs and Madam Jenkins. And both of them are intended at this meeting. You want to identify yourself, councillors? Councillor Adam Higgs. Right. That's you. And Councillor Mary Jenkins at the end. We also have cabinet member, Councillor Liz Clements. He's here to provide information on the cabinet decision. She is accompanied by Officer Mel Jones, Head of Transport Planning and Network Strategy, Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, in brackets, and Steve Arnold, Head of Clean Air Zone, to provide additional information. Before we start this,
Chair, we also have even if another member else to remain more if needed to talk about extensively on the
okay, thank you.
the scheme.
Thank you, Cabinet Member for Arnold. Before we start the specific call-in discussion, I want to reiterate how each item will be structured. Firstly, I'm going to ask Councillor Adams, Higgs and Madam Jenkins to put forward their reasons for raising the call-in with reference to the call-in criteria as this set out in the regions while they're asking the executive to reconsider its decision. Members will then have the opportunity to ask any questions. I will then hand over to the cabinet member to respond to the points raised by and add any other relevant points. At this point, members can ask for clarification on any points on how or why decisions were made. The committee will then hold a discussion, and finally, a vote will then be taken by a show of hands. Those in favour of calling in the decision, those who do not, and those who choose to abstain their vote. If the decision is called in, there is no need to refer it back to the Cabinet, and the decision taken on 17th January can be implemented. The committee could agree that the decision could be improved without the decision being called in. In this case, a letter will be prepared to the Cabinet member outlining these points. The call-in meeting will be closed. If the decision is called in to be reconsidered by the executive, the decision cannot be implemented until the executive reconsiders the decision at the next available cabinet meeting. I will, on behalf of the committee, attend the cabinet meeting with a formal report to the committee referring back to the decision. We need to be clear on the reason why we have called in that decision in this report. The call-in meeting will be closed. If any councillor left the room while the vote takes place, they will be notified.
Chair, we're not happy really. I'd like advice from the solicitors on this point. We believe that Councillor Barker may have shown an element of predetermination in yesterday's full council meeting by virtue of the quite outspoken and direct question that he addressed to Councillor Huxtable. Could you give me a view as to whether that shows predetermination in this matter?
So, Chair, to reiterate the comment I made earlier, all members are entitled through the full council process to ask questions in relation to pertinent matters, and the view has been taken that the question asked by Councillor Barker does not in any way amount to a predetermination or prejudice his involvement in today's meeting.
Okay. I know we got two members of the public in this meeting, and the members of the public in attendance. This is a meeting in public, but not a public meeting. This means members of the public would not be invited to speak, but members of the public are welcome to stay for the entire meeting, including the discussion and vote. Now, can I call on Councillor Higgs and Jenkins in respect of the third call in Active Travel Fund Tranche 2 to put your thing, please. Case.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will go first. So I think just to say for all the points that we've made here, consultation is a theme that will run throughout and will probably be coming to it a number of times. But if you're looking to the reasons for why we've called in, the first would be that the council has failed to consult relevant stakeholders, and while the consultation has taken place, many residents and businesses don't feel like their voices are being listened to. You only need to look at the correspondence you will have all had from King's Heath Business Association just to see that many businesses in King's Heath don't feel listened to on the LTN. The other matter which is worth mentioning on this is residents living on boundary roads. Vicarage Road in particular has been badly affected by the low traffic neighbourhood, and I've had correspondence from residents who live on Vicarage Road myself who are very concerned about the LTN since it's been introduced and continue to oppose it. The other matter that I would like to raise is that point 6 is the decision has generated particular controversy amongst those likely to be affected, and that really does speak for itself. The council admits in its own consultation documents that the scheme has been deeply divisive. I think the percentage that's being given is that 60% complete opposition to the LTN. They don't support any of the proposed schemes, and this brings me on to sort of point 8 in the council hasn't really ever given any serious consideration to scrapping the scheme at all. They've proposed tinkering around the edges, moving a modal filter here and there, but the option of actually not proceeding with the scheme has never really been considered, despite the fact that I feel most residents would want that. I think that's pretty much everything in terms of brief summary of where I stand, but obviously if anyone has any particular questions, I'm happy to answer.
I'd like to hear both parties first, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
So, in respect of the first of the call-ins, which concerns the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, as the committee will know, call-ins have to be made against a set of criteria, and I intend to make my arguments in respect of each of the criteria in turn. Firstly, number 4, the executive appears to have failed to consult relevant stakeholders or other interested persons before arriving at its decision. Once there has been a consultation, we don't believe it was a genuine consultation. Now, I know that the leader of the council is very fond of saying that such consultations are consultations and not referendums. One has to question at what level of response does it become a referendum? That's to say that if you hold a consultation, which isn't a referendum, and you get a substantial majority of people objecting, and you don't take note of that, then one has to wonder what is the point of holding the consultation at all. And for that reason, I think those who oppose this scheme can genuinely argue that there was no proper consultation. The second of the criteria against which we would like to make a call in is point 5. The executive appears to have overlooked some relevant consideration in arriving at its decision. We feel in this respect that the executive has been presented with only a limited number of choices. Essentially, do it or don't do it, and that's not the case. There are plenty of other alternatives that could have been considered. And also, whilst today is not the day for arguing the merits of the scheme, we're only concerning ourselves with whether the decision was taken in the right way. It is worth drawing in 2 of the points that have been made by residents, because I think they do impact upon this. once it was known that I was holding this call in, I've received a substantial volume of correspondence from residents. And two of the excellent points that these residents have made, and some of them are from one of the surrounding roads. As it happens, it's Vicarage Road, but it could have been a number, that the executive have failed to take account of the impact of displacement traffic. So that's to say, if you block a road off, of course there's less traffic going down it stands to reason. But you have to weigh that against the impact that it has on other roads. And that hasn't been taken into account. And also the residents have made the point that there has been no equality of arms. Whilst those supporting the scheme have had extensive access to council resources, those opposing it have had much less access to council resources. Residents have also quite rightly made the point that some of the air quality readings that were taken during the lockdown period. So it is hardly therefore surprising that emissions have fallen during that period. And so point 5 being that the executive appears to vote with some relevant consideration, I would say there are two copper-bottomed, gold-plated considerations that the executive has not taken into account and should therefore reconsider this decision. Point 6, criteria 6. The decision has already generated particular controversy amongst those likely to be affected, or in the opinion of the scrutiny committee, is likely to do so. Well, you know, how much controversy do you want? This has been one of the most controversial schemes that I've seen since I've been a councillor. And I think, therefore, given the amount of anxiety and concern that it's raised for residents and businesses, it's only proper that the executive revisit this decision one more time. And the final criteria on which I believe this call-in should be made is point A. The decision appears to give rise to significant legal, financial, governance or proprietary issue. It appears to many that this has been a case of predetermination, that the consultation hasn't been a meaningful one. The range of options given to the executive were not sufficient. And consequently, one can argue predetermination. In such circumstances, it's possible that it leaves the council open to the potential of a judicial review because the decision wasn't made in the right way. And therefore, I would say, given that this is a real danger in these circumstances, does it not make sense in the interest of protecting the council that we take this back to Cabinet for one more look? And that, Chair, concludes my arguments for why the call-in in respect to the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2 should be subject to a call-in.
Any questions to colleagues or some executives? No? The Mayor in White, the Cabinet members, respond, please.
Thanks, Councillor Lyle. Can I say it's a novel experience to be here as a cabinet member defending a call-in, having been the sort of doyen of call-ins in my previous role as the chair of the scrutiny committee. So yes, it's be a learning curve for me today as well as all the colleagues on the committee and the two colleagues who've launched the call-in. I think it's very timely that we're calling today after yesterday's council meeting where we considered the update report on the Route to Zero climate change strategy, because I think we need to think of all of these measures that we're planning to put in under active travel schemes in that context of what Birmingham as a city is doing to tackle climate change and reduce carbon emissions. And obviously we're going to talk about air pollution and clean air later on, but it's all of a piece. So this is, this scheme is part of our overall strategic direction in the city to reduce congestion, reduce carbon emissions and tackle air pollution. And I think to start off with, I think it's worth reiterating in the call-in, we're looking at the decision that was made at Cabinet in the January meeting, in the recommendations that are set out again, call the pro forma, but we're in the Cabinet report. And the Cabinet report was seeking permission to proceed to develop the full business case and to move beyond the concept design and look at a detailed design which I believe will address many of the points that have been raised with officers during the extensive consultation and engagement that has been carried out to develop this scheme. Because I have to say, in my time on the council, and which is 5 years, I think this is one of the schemes that has actually had the highest level of consultation and engagement, and a real attempt to reach out to residents and listen to, understand and respond to their concerns. So if we look at the recommendations, as I said, they were seeking permission to move to the detailed design, delegating the responsibility for that to me and the relevant assistant director. I think, yes, we have had a large volume of correspondence about this, but I think the reason why the leader, my predecessor, Councillor Zaffa, and myself, we would say that a consultation or engagement process is not a referendum. That is literally the case. We're not carrying out a referendum. We're going out and testing opinion on a proposal, and we're pursuing this overall game of trying to reduce car journeys and reduce congestion and make our streets livable and welcoming places for people on foot and travelling by bike or by scooter through these areas. And some people are never going to agree with that and will see it as a restriction on their freedom to move around by car and other vehicles in their neighbourhood. But this is the strategic direction that we've set, and this whole element of developing low traffic approaches and places for people in all our neighbourhoods is a key element of the transport plan, which the council has signed off in 2021 through a cabinet decision. So I urge you to keep that context in mind as we discuss this. And perhaps to turn to the reasons for calling that Councillors Heeks and Councillor Marion Jenkins have listed. The first one that's been ticked on the pro forma is a failure to consult relevant stakeholders. I've already touched on that in my introduction. I believe that we have held extensive consultation, and we've also had an engagement process in the autumn of 2022. And if you followed the history of this scheme, members of the committee, I think it's actually only Councillor Huxtable, who was present for the call-in of a previous cabinet decision report on this in April of last year. And that was a point where the scheme had already been amended quite significantly to address consultation feedback on the first phase. And what we've got now, I think, is actually quite a good hybrid model, which includes elements of a low traffic neighbourhood with traffic filters, far fewer than were initially envisaged, it has to be said, but also 20 mile an hour speed limits through the area, car-free school streets, treatment of Billesley Lane, and as I said in the cabinet meeting, something which is very close to my heart, the bus gate on Addison Road, which is addressing that bottleneck on the 11 route and making it much more attractive to people to use public transport through Moseley and Kings Heath. So I also was didn't really understand what Councillor Jenkins was getting at when he said that certain people have had privileged access to council resources, because I don't really understand what the factual basis for that would be. We've carried out a number of council-led consultation and engagement sessions, and they're open to everybody, and the officers have been at those to listen to the views of residents. Officers have also dealt with a huge, and I think we can say genuinely huge volume of written correspondence through email and through social media, and they've done their best to respond to all of that. So I don't really feel that that's a justifiable claim to make about how this scheme has been developed. On the issue with boundary roads, I understand why residents on boundary roads are concerned, but I have two main comments to make about that. I think the roads that have been mentioned, particularly Vicarage Road, and I've been aware of Vicarage Road for 30 years, and that has always been a very busy road with significant traffic problems and patterns of congestion, particularly if you're in the section which is by the Camp Hill schools. first time I was shown round Birmingham by my mother-in-law, the car journey that we took around the city avoided Vicarage Road at the time when the Campbell schools were closing down for the afternoon. So I think that in some ways, perceptions of traffic on Vicarage Road may have been affected by what happened during the pandemic, when there was that phase of total lockdown, and people saw what the street was like with no traffic on it, really very little traffic indeed. And as people have returned to work into more normal patterns of life, maybe, and traffic levels have increased, they've seen increased levels of traffic. And I'm not sure that there is actually a causality that can be made with a link that can be made, a causal link that can be made with the LTN scheme such as it exists at the moment. And also, I'd like to mention that there has been some recent research on LTNs in London carried out. I think the main researcher was Rachel Aldred. Officers will correct me if that's not the case. Looking at the impact of LTNs in a number of London boroughs, and I think the impact on boundary roads in those cases was felt to be marginal. So I think we do need to look at the experience in other areas, because we're looking to extend the LTN and make it into a larger scheme with more cells. So I'm very aware of the risks of traffic displacement, but I don't think that they're going to be as significant as the residents are fearing at this stage. And just to remind you that what the stage we're at is commissioning the detailed design work on something which is at the moment is a concept design. The third reason for calling that the colleagues have put before committee members is the decision has generated particular controversy. Well, I'd be an idiot to try and deny that. Clearly, this has been a controversial scheme since its inception, and I think it's worth thinking back to when this started, which was really in the spring of 2020, as we started to be in that awful phase of the pandemic, and we were looking at the emergency active travel measures. So at that stage, the scheme was implemented under an experimental traffic regulation order. And so it was almost like a live experiment, and it's developed from there. And I think there has been a lot of controversy, but in a sense, we are trying to carry out a transport revolution in Birmingham. We are trying to challenge the dominance of the car on our streets and actually turn our streets in our neighbourhoods into places that are welcoming for pedestrians and cyclists and people not moving around in cars. We need to think about how possible is it for children, older people, anyone with any sort of mobility issues, how possible is it to move around in all of our suburbs, but in this case, mostly in Kings Heath. And the whole point of this low traffic neighbourhood places for people scheme is to give people the option to walk and cycle and adopt active travel as their main mode of transport around their neighbourhoods, so that they can have options other than always defaulting to the car as their option of first choice. And this low traffic neighbourhood is part of a wider picture, isn't it? We need to look at the accessibility, the price, and the of public transport and the sort of routes that are available. And we need to keep on challenging the public transport providers on that, so that people have got a range of options, because depending on the people's circumstances or the weather, they're not always going to want to walk or cycle. So they need the extra menu of options which is presented by public transport. And the final reasons for calling, which is the decision appears to have given rise to significant legal, financial, governance or propriety issues. I think we've gone through a consultation phase and an engagement phase where a number of in the consultation of 2 years ago there was two options presented, so there was a range of options for residents to respond to, and we've now moved to this stage where we've got a concept design. We're commissioning the detailed design, which will be a chance to address lots of the specific concerns raised by residents in the most recent engagement sessions, which were over the summer and early autumn of last year. So I think we have given a range of options to residents, and we are pursuing this scheme in the framework of the Birmingham Transport Plan, as I've already explained, And also we're doing it within the framework of our overall response to the climate emergency and the need to reduce the number of vehicle journeys and the carbon emissions that are generated by those journeys. And I don't believe there are any other proprietary issues. And I think everyone who's on the committee, is entitled to participate in the decision in an entirely legitimate way. I'm happy to deal with any other questions that people have or members of the committee have. But I hope I've covered in general terms the reasons why I don't agree with the criteria that have been cited for the call-in. Thank you very much, Chair.
Any members need clarification on any points or on why the decision is made?
Not clarification on the point, but I do have some questions to ask, Chair. Okay.
I'd be so disappointed if you did entirely out of character.
Well, first of all, I would, in playing top trumps, as it were, I've known about Vicarage Road for about 39 years. Having gone to having gone to Camp Hill, the school you referenced, aged 11, and then representing at least part of Vicarage Road for 16 years as a councillor. But it was interesting, Councillor Gemms, to hear you describe it as a live experiment. So if I just take through the timeline.
What I said was when it was implemented initially, we used an experimental traffic regulation order, and that's what I think that was quite specific.
I did write down your exact phrase. You were treating it as a live experiment.
Yeah.
So just to take through the timeline, just so that I've got to clear my mind. The Emergency Active Travel Fund, introduced, as we know, in response to the pandemic in spring 2020. Quite rightly, the government said, get the measures in, no need for any consultation, meaningful or otherwise. So we put in the ETROs during 2020. Then in terms of Active Travel Measures Fund 2 and 3, the government said you have to do consultation, it has to be meaningful. So when we did the consultation between Feb 21 and April 21, as referred to in para 5.1, positive was 36, negative was 45. Then when we did formal consultation, approximately 10 months later, between October 21 to November 21, the positive, as identified in 5.2, the positive was now 34 and the negative was now 56. So during the period of that live experiment, the positive had gone down 2 and the negative had gone up 11. Now, if it's a live experiment, those results tend to suggest to me that having experienced it, and with the negative scores going up 11 and the positive scores going down 2, that tells you the feelings of people during this live experiment who are part of this consultation. And then, as referenced in 5.2, as part of that formal consultation between October 21 and November 21, 60% said neither between options A and B, and 62% said neither options C and D. Is that a correct summary of the timeline and the consultation taken part as part of that timeline? Is there anything factually incorrect in what I've said?
I think you've read out from the Cabinet report, so yes,
Yes,
that's actually
yes.
correct, yes.
Okay. I mentioned I've known Vicarage Road for 39 years of my life, either as a school child or a councillor or a Brummie or a combination of 2 out of those 3. And I know what it was like in 1984, and I know what it's been like in 2021, 2022. And I can only talk about my perception. My perception is that it's quite different. And I think you're actually right when you said you were told to avoid Vicarage Road because it was busy when you were first taken round Birmingham. But I think the point is, with these modal filters, is that it's effectively, if you're going in one direction, forcing traffic down Vicarage Road and no options. So because of the modal filters already in place, on, if I recall correctly, Abbots Road, in terms of Hazelhurst Road, in terms of Colmore Road, you are forced now to travel along Vicarage Road because there's no cut through between that and Howard Road, or vice versa. Is that correct? So therefore, if you're heading in the direction of Cartland Road, you are forced either to use Howard Road or Vicarage Road. There is no cutting through. That was the whole purpose of the modal filters, I assume. Is that correct?
The whole point of a low traffic neighbourhood is to stop people rat running. So I mean, you're I suppose when I listen to you, I feel that you can't imagine a scenario where people are not doing anything other than driving, and we're trying to make it possible for people to walk and cycle. So in this scenario, I don't want to start trading our experience of Vicarage Road environs. However, I will say that through my contact with the Livingston family, I have the inherited memories of Vicarage Road going back to the early 70s when Alistair Livingston, my brother-in-law, first went there. And I think it's always been a very busy road, and there's a lot of rut running around there. And that's the reason why Neil and his older brother, my late partner and his older brother, always walked to school. So, and I think that behaviour and the tackling how people are moving around it for those short journeys, particularly on the school run, this is what this whole scheme is about. So, when I have these discussions, I suppose that we're doing this to make it possible for people to literally shift their mode of travel from the car to walking or cycling or wheeling or scooting or using public transport. And we're also trying to make the neighbourhoods more livable by curbing access to the people who live in the neighbourhoods who want to have access to their car, but making it less convenient and less direct for people who are simply driving through to use these roads as through routes and rat runs. And on the consultation data, I think I can bring the officers in if that's helpful. But at the beginning, I said that we know that that there's controversy about these proposals, and a lot of people who have fed back who don't like some of the proposals. But we have listened to that, amended the schemes quite significantly, come up with a hybrid model which has got all of those elements like the one-way streets, car-free school streets, traffic calming, a bus gate, and that's an attempt to try and find almost a compromise model that addresses the concerns of a range of people. Mel, do you want to comment at all on the consultation data?
So, Councillor Huxtable, you were factually correct in what you said, but I think there are other elements of consultation that did take place that weren't referred to. So, just to be clear, albeit that the government said we didn't need to consult, we actually did do some online engagement because that was all we could do. That was all we could do during lockdown. So we did reach out to the communities in whatever methods were available to us before anybody put a spade in the ground, so to speak. It wasn't like we just rocked up one day and closed a load of roads. There was a period of engagement prior to anything being implemented. Councillor Clements has referred to the use of an experimental traffic regulation order. I think there has been some confusion about what that means. Versus an experimental versus a normal traffic regulation order. So an experimental traffic regulation order effectively means that the consultation period, the statutory consultation period, runs for the first 6 months. So the first 6 months after the scheme was implemented was a statutory consultation. For a normal traffic regulation order, the statutory consultation takes place before the scheme is implemented. So all of that consultation did take place on the first round of schemes, and the figures that you've quoted are correct in terms of the overall percentages for and against, but they weren't the only questions that were asked in the consultation. Generally speaking, we do feel obliged to ask an overall do you support or not question, but there's also a lot of other parts to that engagement that actually try to draw out people's reasons for supporting or otherwise, and that is what was used to inform the later development of the scheme. For example, people told us they didn't like the scheme because there were too many more modal filters, because they didn't think there were enough entry and exit points into each cell, because they would prefer to have more one-way streets to give them more access options, and all of these other things. So that's a snapshot is what you read out, but actually there's a great deal of richness to that consultation that's not necessarily reflected in those absolute numbers. And then on Vicarage Road, these roads that, you know, the so-called boundary roads where traffic is being pushed onto, they are for the most part classified A and B roads. So they're roads that are identified to be sort of the backbone of the highway network in that respect. Traffic capacity is finite. You can only get so much traffic down a particular road. And I think this is one of the things that was drawn out of the research in London, is actually a lot of the boundary roads are already at or near capacity. So there can only be a certain amount of extra traffic that can physically fit down those roads in the first place. And I think particularly on Vicarage Road, there was an unfortunate timing with some main Severn Trent waterworks in the area that closed another road. And actually, the vast majority of the displaced traffic that was experienced onto Vicarage Road in the early days was likely to have been mostly traffic diverting from those works and not actually from within the LTN area itself. We've been monitoring traffic on Vicarage Road since the implementation of the scheme. Traffic levels have been stable, certainly for about a year. And we've also been monitoring air quality on Vicarage Road as well. And air quality has remained stable and well within the acceptable limits. So I think the impact on Vicarage Road, other than perhaps that early stage when there was other things in the area that was causing an issue, has been stable for a considerable period of time. Thanks, Nick.
Just a follow-up question is that following the consultation and the further engagement exercise, if I understand it, you're saying that taking into account what you learned from those, you went back and revisited the plan and made adjustments, correct? So what is the harm of going back and getting a further, we like it now that you've come up with this, or we don't like it, even though you've come up with this, rather than to proceed, which is effectively what we're saying this cabinet decision, this cabinet report allows you to actually do. Why don't you test the new design and give the people of Branwood and King's Heath Ward, Moseley Ward and Billesley Ward a say as to yay or nay whether you've got the new plan, the new designs right?
So we have consulted, or we have engaged on the new designs, but we've focused that in on specific points of detail. So if there's a modal filter on this road, would you prefer it this side or that side? So it was quite detailed, and that the outcomes of that won't necessarily be reflected until the detailed design is published. But there is still a further statutory consultation that we have to carry out. So when we take this scheme through to the necessary traffic regulation orders in order to introduce the new one-ways and modal filters, the people in the area will have a further right to put in representations at that point as well.
But just to be clear, we're not going to do a further, let's employ Jacobs to actually do a consultation.
There will be no more soft consultation on the low traffic neighbourhood elements, but there are other elements where there will be, for example, the 20-mile-an-hour limits, the bus gate on Addison Road and the traffic calming on Billesley Lane will have further consultation.
I mean, my feeling with this, because that's what I said in my opening remarks, I feel that this scheme has had a very large amount of consultation and engagement. And in the end, there's never going to be an absolutely perfect solution that everyone is happy with. So we're going to have to go with the sort of hybrid option that we're already developed in outline. And that's why we want to make progress with this and through this cabinet report. move, to have permission to move to the detailed design phase. Because this is part, an overall approach. You'll be aware, Tim, from the discussions that we had on this committee before the council elections, that there's other work going on a low traffic approach in Lascelles and one for Bourneville and B30. And we think of the four big moves in the Birmingham Transport Plan. Places for people, livable neighbourhoods, low traffic neighbourhoods, call them what you will. That is one of the four big moves of the traffic plan, and it goes along with the mode shift and trying to manage parking demand and doing a treatment of the city centre with the city segments. So I'm keen for us to progress into the stage where we can do the more detailed design, and that will open up the options to address many of the concerns that were raised in the summer engagement process and through some of the local, the most recent correspondence. Not all of them, because it's always going to be the art of the possible. But I think throughout, officers have gone out and listened and sought to understand what residents' concerns are. And some things have been changed. So as far as I understand it, from the scheme that was put out in the engagement process in the summer, there were things like the filter on Barn Lane, which has been removed when we went out for the engagement process. And because we received so many representations about that, that has been reinstated in this outline plan. There may be other things, but I think we're at the stage where we need to move forward with this, because this process has already been ongoing for almost 3 years now. And we want to implement the full scheme, because I think actually having the full scheme with all the cells that are outlined in this plan will actually also be part of addressing some of the impacts that people are concerned about on the boundary roads, because we're treating a much wider area.
We mentioned consultation and engagement on multiple times, and I go to 5.8 of the report, and we talk about the correspondence, about the scheme, but we talk about an online petition which attracted over 4,000 signatures requesting removal of the measures. Survey of half the businesses in the Kingsheath, or the then Kingsheath Business Improvement District. I am aware from sitting through City Council meetings there have been petitions physically presented at City Council in opposition. I think indeed Councillor Hicks might have presented one of them from residents in his ward and neighbouring wards, which strangely I can't see any mention of in 5.8 or anywhere else in the report. Of course, we all know, and we obviously don't know, because it's a secret ballot, why the re-ballot of the Kingsheath Business Improvement District actually failed. But you would have to be blind not to see that some businesses treated it as a mini referendum on the Kingsheath LTN. That's all over the internet and so on and so forth. So, given that there wouldn't appear to be in the report all the substantial things, because I think we all agree that petitions presented by councillors at full council are significant documents that need to be taken into account when coming to decisions, purely from a democratic mandate and democratic process. Given that no mention is made of the failure, the very recent failure in terms of the re-ballot for the Kingsheath Business Improvement District, which I thought I've been a great supporter of bids since their very concept and the value they can actually bring to vibrant local centres and making them as a beacon for the neighbourhood and the community. Are we happy that those have been taken into account meaningfully?
I mean, obviously, I've read this cabinet report several times in great detail, and I think what it is absolutely transparent about how the consultation was carried out, the results and the feedback. In the paragraph that you're referring to, Tim, Councillor Huxtable, there's the sentence beginning, several petitions requesting removal of the measures have been submitted. So they are not all listed individually, but it's clear that a number of petitions have been submitted. And I assume that the online petition with the over 4,000 signatures is referenced individually because it was one of the larger ones. And there's also reference to a survey of Bitney. I believe that was a business survey of some businesses in Kings Heath. It wasn't conducted by the Business Improvement District. And I don't think it has anything to do with the bid, actually. And I think the whole matter of the ballot, for the renewal of the Business Improvement District is entirely irrelevant to this discussion. This is a cabinet report about the Kings Heath and Moseley Places for People scheme. So I think it's not our place to actually speculate about the reasons behind the result of that ballot of businesses in Kings Heath. I mean, it seems to me a sad development because I've always thought of Kings Heath as an area that's benefited immensely from having a bid, like all the other areas in the city that have got bids as well. So, but that's not the matter of debate for this call-in, I think.
David?
Thank you, Chair. Just to focus on the actual reasons for calling, the couple of the questions I had, if you could respond. One of the reasons was that no one considered removing them. Now, could you just speak about maybe the engagement meetings and how it was made clear what the process and result would be if the whole scheme were removed?
So, certainly after the cabinet member report that was approved this time last year, the position at that time was that if we couldn't find a way forward, that the scheme would be removed in its entirety, and I think that was always clearly on the table, and it's explicit in the cabinet member report. We've certainly communicated it verbally and in writing, and it's an option in the cabinet report as well. In the options considered, there is an option there that clearly says, we wouldn't recommend that option because it doesn't fulfil any of the objectives of the transport plan and just takes us right back to where we started. But that was always an option, and I think it particularly when it reached the point where we felt that further repeated iterations would not be helpful and certainly not a good use of the resource we had available. That option would be to remove the schemes completely.
Another one was that there was no meaningful consultation of boundary roads. Could you also talk about how boundary roads were consulted to get in engagement meetings, how they were in any way specifically consulted?
So we had in the initial consultations, it's open to anybody to consult to take part in consultation. Generally speaking, we do where the software allows. We ask people to indicate a postcode so that we've got some flavour of where people are coming from. I think as the process evolved and we recognised that boundary roads was really an issue, we commissioned a wider area traffic study specifically to actually look at and do some traffic modelling as to what the impacts on the boundary roads would be in order to inform the later stages of development. And when we did the most recent engagement, the consultation was structured around each of the cells, and there was a session specifically around people. And they had their own, if was correct to be there, they had their own group at each session. So anybody that came from the boundary roads had somebody that was sort of suitably briefed on the elements of the scheme to deal with that.
Okay, brilliant. Another part of consultation. Is there any definition, statutory or otherwise, of what a minimum requirement of meaningful consultation is, or is that kind of an ether?
So all of the consultation that that we do on these schemes tends to come in two parts. Call it informal, you can call it soft. And that's what most of the things that are being reported here actually refer to consultation that we do because it's good practice, but not legally statutorily required in that respect. All any statutory elements are governed by the traffic regulation order process, as I've already outlined, either in an experimental traffic regulation order where the right to make representation is during the first 6 months, or a regular traffic regulation order where people have the opportunity to make representation and object in advance of that. And I don't know whether Tarndip wants to add anything to that, but it's a very clear process in terms of the statutory consultation that we do on traffic regulation, or it's a standard process nationally that we follow, and if the objections are received, they have to be considered, and then there is a separate reporting process involving the appropriate assistant director in consultation with the cabinet member to overrule any of those objections.
But I think in general terms, you can tell whether a consultation has been significant if the plans that were originally put out for consultation have changed. And I think that when we went through the cabinet member report, which was subject to calling last April 2022, I think the then cabinet member, my predecessor, Councillor Zappa, who was represented by Councillor Ward at a meeting, that it was a very clear message from him that the plans had been amended significantly to address the feedback that had been received in the consultation, and that's how we've ended up with essentially a hybrid approach that combines modal filters with one-way streets, car-free school streets, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and the bus gate. So I think that the initial approach that is much more focused on a low traffic neighbourhood with modal filters, that's evolved quite a lot in response to the feedback that's been received.
Yeah. That we generally take we asked, you said, we did approach to reporting. So what were we asking about? What did people tell us, and then what changes have we made as a result? And just to add that I think that very often the simple way of looking at it is that the soft consultation amongst wanting to understand people's views and make this and be able to tailor schemes to local needs, there is definitely an objective there to try and flush out any potential objections that will come as part of the statutory process, and to try and resolve them before they actually manifest as a statutory objection.
Sorry, am I interrupting? No, sorry. Thank you. I just had a couple of three questions for the next in mind.
Firstly, picking up point 8 here, there's never been any serious consideration given to scrapping the scheme, which suggests an element of predetermination by the executive, which it's pretty clear that's the case. I mean, I know you're talking about this goal to get towards a transport plan, but it gets to a point where, at what level does, as Councillor Jenkins mentioned, does consultation become, the opposition becomes so great and so vociferous against an idea? Will the council actually consider seriously scrapping a scheme? Because it's pretty obvious that this plan has been rejected by residents, rejected by the vast majority of businesses. I think it's phase 1 that some of the comments that I've been picking up on just what we're talking and just having a look at the background to this before we arrived today. Some businesses have quoted comments such as customers are avoiding the area. It's affecting our business due to loss of trade. Trade is down to 50%. There is now more pollution. Street closures restrict our care staff to access the vulnerable, elderly and housebound in an emergency. So I cannot think for the life of me why you think it's a good idea to proceed when it's pretty obvious that you haven't brought the residents or businesses along with you, which presumably has got to be a key consideration, and you've failed to do that. That was my first point. And any comments? you'd like to make on that. If that's okay.
Councillor Parkin, thanks for your question. I suppose I'm going to be at risk of repeating myself, but I think that we have held extensive consultations, and your first point was that whether there would ever been one of the options would be removing the scheme entirely, and that was easily included in the cabinet report as an option, but it's not the recommended one and not what cabinet has decided to do. And I come back, the transport plan to which you refer to, that's already a policy that the council has adopted. That is the strategic framework of all of our transport policy and delivery work in the city, because we've got to address congestion, carbon emissions and air quality. And that's why we've got these two critical decisions that have gone through cabinet in January.
So why are you winning the argument?
Well, we're not having an argument. We're developing a policy and implementing it on the streets, as it were. And I suppose I feel that you haven't appreciated that the point of the policies is to promote mode shift, and that means giving people options to allow them not to have to do their everyday journeys always by car, so that they've got some options which are safe walking and cycling and good, accessible and cheap public transport. And that I make no apology, that is what I'm in this cabinet portfolio to promote, and that is entirely consistent with the policies of this council, and we are exercising some leadership on the process. And I feel that we've demonstrated through the responses that I and the officers have already given in relation to the consultation exercises and how they were carried out, and the engagement process that was carried out last summer. We've given evidence through there that we have modified proposals quite significantly to take account of the feedback received from residents. And I think, again, this cabinet report is totally transparent, because it just, in the paragraph that Councillor Huxtable was referencing, I think it was 5.8, there's a reference to a survey carried out with some businesses in the King's Heath area, but I can't comment on the robustness of that survey, or I haven't seen the survey. I don't know how the questions were asked, and I don't know how reflective it is of business in King's Heath. But I think for those of us who are regularly in King's Heath for shopping or leisure purposes, and when we go there, we see quite a vibrant area, which actually, compared to many other areas in the city, seems to have come through the pandemic relatively well, and has a good number of successful businesses. And I think of places like York Road, which I visited at all seasons of the year. I think that people that find that a very attractive destination, and it's become a place. It's a reason to go to King's Heath, because you can go and sit outside and then enjoy a pleasant environment for a drink or a meal or a catch up with friends.
I think what I say on that is, if it's such a compelling argument, it's strange that so few people are buying into it, because they're not really. The other point I was going to make, if you don't mind, was that just talking about the way the industry is moving in cleaner vehicles and battery technology and so on. At the end of last year, there was 1.1 million plug-in cars in the UK, which includes nearly 660,000 battery electric. So it is a growing market, and at the same time, diesel car sales are plummeting. They were down 39% last year. So, have you seen the money this is costing? Have you considered a better way of investing this in improving our road infrastructure, because roads are going to be here forever, and we're going to be still using them, whether it's public transport, cyclists, or battery cars and so on. The state of roads are potholes, the standard of our infrastructure is deteriorating all the time. And the second point is the expansion of electric charging points, because I know there's a strategy to put more electric charging points, but I printed something off the paper yesterday. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders have said that the rollout of new electric vehicle charging points is failing to keep pace with demand, and that the ratio of new charging point installations to plug-in cars fell from 1 in 42 in the last 3 months of 2021 to 1 in 62 last year. So my comment or question would be, given that cars and vehicles are becoming increasingly clean, and we're promoting the sale, and a lot of industry depends on jobs in the West Midlands in the motor trade, why aren't we instead looking at investing some of the money we could be spending on a scheme that's clearly devised to will continue to remain so. I agree with the councillor that using that money more sensibly in monitoring whether everyone's there.
Thanks, Councillor Parkin. What I'd say to that is that the two things are not mutually exclusive, and we're at the same time as promoting places for people and livable neighbourhoods in every part of the city. We are also promoting our electric vehicle charging strategy, which in its first phase is based around rapid charging hubs. And if you were looking at the update report on the Route to Zero action plan yesterday, you've seen that so far we've installed 676, to check the stats on that, 686 charge points, 143 of those are rapid charging points, and with 600 or more in planning. So we are giving real focus to allowing people to charge electric vehicles, but I make no apologies for saying electric vehicles are not the solution in a conurbation to dealing with congestion and space. I mean, I live on a terrace street in Bourneville where we have literally run out of space for parked cars. And in a minute, I hope we're going to move on to talk to the clean air zone call in, but we've got at the moment a clean air zone that addresses nitrogen dioxide emissions, but we have yet to move on to how we address particulate emissions, which will also, are also emitted by electric vehicles, not just by diesel or internal combustion engine cars. So I don't see that progressing with this cabinet decision in no way impedes making progress on electric vehicle charging. And like you, I mean, I think that this region is a centre of innovation in manufacturing and automotive technology. And I want our universities and our manufacturers to make leaps and bounds in battery technology and make it possible for people to have access to cheap electric vehicles. But I see them as really only a part of the solution to our issues in the Birmingham and the West Midlands, which are largely about congestion and the sheer volume of vehicles. And I come back to the point I made at the beginning, that we almost need you to make a leap of imagination, because the whole point of these schemes is to promote mode shift and to move away from the assumption that every journey that you do, your first choice must be to drive. And that's not saying there's cars absolutely useful and essential tool for a lot of journeys. I absolutely acknowledge that, and there's nothing in these schemes that will stop people driving or accessing their properties by car. But I think we need, if we're going to use the levelling up language, to level up the Birmingham and the West Midlands to other conurbations around major cities like London, or some of our European partner cities, or some North American cities that some of us have visited, where there is a really good public transport offer that is an expensive network, it's cheap, operates 24 hours, and it's complemented by active travel routes, safe routes for walking and cycling, and all of those options. In a way, if you think of parts of London where there's the dense tube network, a regulated bus network, trams, and cycling routes, it ceases to become such a controversy, because people find from practical experience that it's actually easier to use the public transport or walk and cycle, and it saves them time and it's more efficient for business. If we're concerned about business, congestion and the sheer difficulty and time that's taken of getting places in the built-up area, that is a major drag on businesses. I'm sure we'd all want to try and reduce that.
A couple of things. I keep hearing about referendums and businesses. If I can speak on the businesses in Kings Heath, I think they do really, really well. We have one of the lowest vacancy rates going. But I would say on that, there has been no unquestioningly legitimate survey of businesses. The closest would be the Business Improvement District asked businesses about removing parking spaces a few years ago. Even then, I think it's a stretch. But there was an engagement meeting for businesses in September, October, I forget when. So the first thing I just question if there's any feedback from that at all. And on a referendum of residents, again, there hasn't been one unless you count the local elections, which I know some people try to turn them into a referendum. Considering we're asking questions to people about detailed design, so interplaying and intersecting buses, speed limits, filters, one ways, is it even possible to question that in binary terms? Or do we have to come about it in another way?
Okay, who's going to ask it, Liz or Mel?
I might ask Eva to comment on
Yeah.
the business meeting.
There was an online business briefing on 6th of October 2021. There's another business document about Kingsley Community Centre on 1st November 2021. I have to refer to one column of the members that turned up. Many. And in 22, there was a business session on Wednesday, 20th of September.
Okay, so that's answered the question for the please have it. Okay, Councillor Colin Green, you.
Thank you, Chair. I have three questions, if I may. The first one to Councillor Jenkins. You say that the decision was predetermined as one of your complaints, but didn't say much about it. Could you evidence that decision, that statement for us, please?
Well, yes, I think essentially the point is that opinion was sought from residents and businesses. It's clear that the majority, a substantial majority, opposed the scheme, and yet the scheme is going ahead anyway. And therefore, one might conclude that it was always the intention that that scheme would go ahead, almost irrespective of what the residents and businesses said. And that's why I will say that there is a case for arguing there was predetermination, and that would be the basis for a potential judicial review.
I suggest that maybe you're both right and wrong there. The consultation was about which of two options to take, not whether to take one of the options. So the decision wasn't predetermined. The decision was, which of these two should we do?
That'll make exactly my point. That there was never an opportunity to prevent the scheme, just whether you want one bad scheme or another bad scheme. And therefore it appears to be predetermined.
But that was the decision that we're questioning.
Yes, well, if we are in agreement on that, and it seems that we are, then it must be called in.
To Councillor Clement.
I think we should focus on the fact that what you're calling the recommendations of the cabinet report. So it would be worth just reminding yourselves what those are, and they are in the front of your pro forma. And I go back to the point that we sought permission to move ahead, to commission the business case and the detailed design. So I think it's important that the committee members understand that.
Yeah, it's important that we all remember today is not the day, although we've had extensive discussion about the scheme, today is not the day to decide whether we should have the scheme or not. We are simply addressing whether the decisions were made in the correct way.
Thank you, Councillor Clement. You've said at this meeting twice today that LTNs are to make it possible to walk and cycle. I've been safely walking and cycling in this city for over 20 years. It's the boundary roads that I found to be a problem, and they are not solved by LTNs. Could you reword your statements so that we can understand them a bit better? What I'm saying is it's already possible to walk and cycle safely. LTNs don't fix that.
Well, I think that's interesting because the whole point of King's Heath, this part of King's Heath being the focus for this work, was because there'd already been a number of campaigns in this area focusing on the fact that it isn't actually safe for children to, or parents' perception it isn't safe for their children to walk or cycle to school. And I can think of a number of campaigns that have gone on in the area over the last 10 years. Some of you may remember the work that was done on a BBC documentary called Fighting for Air, which I think was broadcast in 2017 and 2018, which was looking primarily at levels of traffic around the high street and the level of congestion and air pollution. But it focused particularly on primary schools in the area and the need to try and clean up the air for children and make it possible for them to walk and cycle to school. So I suppose the reason why we have got this transport plan and a focus on active travel is that my perception as someone who does cycle and has never, again, we're sort of going back into ancient history, aren't we? But I moved here in 1999 from a number of places. First of all, where I grew up in Essex, and then latterly in Oxford, where I was a student, and then I worked for a number of years, where I did cycle most of the time. And when I moved to Birmingham, I would say I lost my confidence in cycling because the experience of cycling around Birmingham is, quite frankly, quite scary, even if you're an experienced cyclist. So the whole, the purpose of implementing the Birmingham Cycle Revolution that started scrutiny inquiry in about 2014 was to address the need for safe cycling infrastructure, and also the need to create safe routes for walking as well, because I think that the sheer number of short car journeys and vehicle journeys that are done every day illustrates the dominance of the car. So I think the statistic is at 250,000 journeys of less than a mile done by car every working day in the city, and that's what you're up against, on the road as a cyclist. And so I suppose I think we see things somewhat differently. So I'm not going to. I've offered a sort of paraphrase or a reiteration of what I've said. I'm not. I don't see the need to actually change the main thrust of what I said in my introduction or throughout the debate.
And my last question is also to you, if I may. A lot of the focus of the LTN has been on air quality. With the sales of petrol and diesel cars now falling, and the rise of electric cars, air quality will solve itself. It seems the only target left for LTNs then is congestion. Wouldn't a focus on public transport be better than a focus on closing off streets for reducing congestion?
I suppose I'd have to pick you up on a number of things you just said. I mean, an LTN is not, it's filtering streets and making them less permeable to cars. It's not closing them off. In fact, it's making them more accessible to people walking and cycling. And also, I think we come back to some of the discussion that we were Richard, Councillor Parker and I were having about electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, are obviously less polluting in terms of nitrogen dioxide than a diesel engine or an internal combustion engine, but they are still generators of particulate matter. So air quality will continue to be an issue. And also, I think we want to show leadership on our approach to air quality in Birmingham. So we await the targets that the government is going to set in the new Environment Act. Those targets have not yet been defined as far as I know. But I'm very much hoping that the government takes the lead from the organisation, which has said recently that there's no such thing as a safe level of air pollution, and their targets are already much more stringent than the ones that have applied up to now in the UK. So I think that for the health of all of us, but particularly our children and anyone with any sort of respiratory condition of any age, that really moving towards the minimal levels of air pollution, the lowest levels that we can possibly achieve, is what we need to be doing. And those are some of the issues that obviously then highly relevant to the second item that we're going to be calling in later on.
With respect, you've studiously ignored the point of my question, which was about public transport. But before we come to that, on the subject of air pollution, there's more than just nitrogen dioxide in the car emissions from petrols and diesels. Now, electric cars don't have CO2 or CO either. On particulate matter, the only particulate matter emitted from an EV is from its tyres. And studies have shown that they're far greater, larger particles than from exhaust emissions, such that they don't float in the air. They immediately sink to the ground. They're not responsible for respiratory conditions. But on the question, the substance of my question was, wouldn't a focus on public transport be better for reduction of congestion rather than making car travel more difficult? Get people out of cars onto buses rather than trying to force them all the way to cycling.
I'm not sure if you've misunderstood some of the things that I've said, but I don't see that as mutually exclusive. And you can see from the way that I've approached this cabinet portfolio that I'm almost performatively taking public transport and showing people that it is possible to live in Birmingham and use public transport and supplement that by cycling and walking. So I'd very much like us to have the powers as the council to run our own bus company, and I'd like us to have publicly operated rail, so that we have much more influence on the networks, the frequency, and the emissions levels of the public transport in this city. But obviously, in the model that we have now, it's largely privatised apart from Midland Metro. So I absolutely agree with you that promoting public transport is absolutely top line priority. And I hope for a change of government with a different approach, and a move towards public ownership and public operation of public transport as a public service. And as many of you know, I'm very interested in continental Europe, Germany in particular. I choose to go and spend my holidays there, partly because I'm a transport nerd and I love travelling around on an extensive train network with cheap fares, which is what I experienced in Germany in the summer. So I don't see that going ahead with this decision in any way undermines an effort to champion public transport, and that's what we're doing all the time. And other elements of the transport plan, which is obviously the overall strategic framework for all of this work, are about prioritising mass transit. So in Birmingham, as Mel looked out this from me, buses are the available mass transit system. We haven't got an underground, and we've got a fairly limited tram network at the moment, or a tram line. So the other elements of the transport plan are all about creating space on the roads for the vehicles that are taking the 77 passengers in a double decker and the 45 in a single decker bus. So I think you're right. We need to focus on public transport, and we need to keep lobbying to ensure that there's more investment in public transport, a recognition that it's a public service and that it should be operated for the benefit of the passengers, not for shareholders. So I think we're to that extent, I think we probably agree about that.
If I may just add, Cabinet Member, I think the key is integrated transport, and I think a lot of people forget that there is usually a walk leg, as we would call it, to every journey. Even those made by car, actually, there is a walking element, and we need to think about not just the journeys by public transport, that whole door-to-door journey experience. And one of the things that a safer environment to walk and cycle does is actually enhances access to the public transport network. So they are directly complementary in that regard.
I think we had a good discussion on this. The issue remain for us is it has no, where the code. So I don't think we need any further discussion. So can we move to vote? This? No, do one at a time. Yeah. Okay. So can I sort of plans or in favor?
We need to leave the room. Yeah. If you're not going to have any summing up, then I think we need to leave the room, because otherwise there's going to be a section that we're trying to influence. Discretion, Chair. Yeah.
But you wish to?
I'm happy to. I don't want to be accused.
But I mean, it's not, would you like a camera member in the office stay here, or?
I'm looking at the senior solicitor.
Chair, I believe the convention and the procedure note does suggest that both the Cabinet Member supporting officers as well as the members calling in the decision would leave the room at this point.
Fine.
I can say the main callings that I called, that I shared here, that was what was routinely done. So,
but I was given advice that if the officer can remember want to remain, but if that's the usual practice, then please, and then I'll. What are the legal advice?
Lunch break. Careful, let me just get rid of the table.
They can continue to discuss this outside.
Are you going to discuss, or do you want us for a discussion and then go to the vote?
Yeah.
Or just go to the vote today?
Yes, they can't see that on the camera.
Oh, right. Well, there we go.
Yeah. Right.
Discussion first, but all go straight.
Would you like to have a discussion on it, or I mean, I know we went all over the place.
I'm happy to go straight to the vote, so that they won't have to wait that long.
Mm-hmm. Right. Those in favour for the calling?
Can't do any harm.
Those against?
So you have the casting vote.
So,
Chair,
This is the thing I want to do always. Well, the way I look at it, if you even call it in, what is it going to make? I
We
mean,
have to revisit the decision.
yeah, but they don't have to make it change anything. That's the one thing. It's just a bit of a exercise where you say it's called in.
Maybe it's been predetermined. Surely not.
The point that councillor Jenkins made was that it leaves us open to judicial review. If the council cabinet has revisited the decision and made it twice, it's clear then that it's deliberate. So it makes the judicial review a little simpler. If we as a committee decide not to force them to revisit the decision, it comes back on us then rather than them.
Just two observations on that in order to assist your decision. Firstly, that assumes that there is a likelihood of a judicial review and a likelihood of it being successful. I don't necessarily share that view. But in terms of the ultimate decision, I think that should be based on a judgment as to whether you feel the criteria for calling have been made out, as to whether, as opposed to looking further ahead as to whether it will make any difference to the bigger picture. So I think the decision should really be made on the basis of whether a kind of a factual and evidential judgment to be made on what you've heard today and what's been presented as to whether you feel the grounds for calling have been satisfied, and that should be what your decision is based on.
Right. Let's go back to right.
So, with the remaining members of the committee, clearly the vote was 3-3. So in terms of your position on that, Chair, that's the only sort of advice I would offer in terms of how you exercise your vote, which will clearly be the influencing vote to the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the evidence, hearing both sides. Also, I know we got easily divided here, same way. I feel the thing you're happening on the ground over there, but I feel what the evidence has been given to me that the calling is criteria has been met. So I will cast my vote in against the calling.
So it's not called in, Chair?
No.
Okay. I'll call them back in then to say, and then we'll move on to the next item. Yeah.
Do you want me to do it just one second? Maybe if you start, and I'll let you do.
No, we got the actual name for the clear.
Right, why did it clear?
Clear your font, no. So it's okay.
Yeah.
So we had a vote and the decision to calling wasn't held. Okay. So
What
we,
was the vote? What was the vote?
it was 3-4. 3-4.
And bear in mind, it's on live stream.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, you know.
I was going to call for names, but then and I realised, as we said, Councillor Jenkins, it's on live stream, so the public can see how we voted.
Okay. Now we move on to the second calling, request for calling on age-owned revenues. Down to Councillor Higgs and Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, and everyone wants for. This isn't a debate on the merits of the travel tax, aka clean air zone scheme. It is simply was the decision taken in the correct way. So, again, I'll address it in terms of the calling criteria. And I was starting with number 5. The executive appears to have overlooked some relevant consideration in arriving at this decision. 3.2 of the council's constitution sets out the principles of good decision making. Section 1C says a proper consideration of available options for action and or inaction must be taken. And this principle is also enshrined in case law. However, the Cabinet report shows that only 2 options were considered: do nothing or spend the money exactly as set out. There's very evidently one other option here, which would be to allocate the money in a different way. So that to me suggests that there is a fundamental flaw in the decision-making process, and in itself a compelling reason for calling. The second criteria for calling will be number 6. The decision has already generated particular controversy amongst those likely to be affected, or in the opinion of the committee is likely to do so. And I think this would be an appropriate point to respond to Councillor Clement's query on the point I raised about equality of art. And I have an email here from one of the residents. I don't propose to read it all, and I'm going to leave it as anonymous at the moment because I don't have the resident's permission to share it, but I think I can read 1 or 2 little parts that illustrate the point. And it says, we on Vicarage Road first learned about the council's LTN plans when they started to be implemented. Since then, if I may continue, since then, it has consistently been very difficult for us, and indeed those representing the other various boundary roads, to get any meaningful ongoing engagement regarding the issues involved. And the rest of it goes into some detail, which the point made in terms of the consultation was that residents are complaining to me that they weren't in an equal position to make their case. You disputed that, and now I'm telling you why they make that
But we've
point.
already.
But they go on to say, if I may, this is staff access given to the SFM. Please take a look at their website, and so it goes on. And I understand from what the resident says that they had established a monthly meeting with the council. So it does seem that the resident is in a position to justify the claim that there wasn't an equal opportunity to make their case.
Sorry, we are cleaning your revenue, not on the previous calling. So can you tell me what the relevant to?
Yes, but essentially, yes, but it's all essentially I mean, there are 2 allocations.
Separate reports. We've just done a calling of one of them. We've now moved on to the second one.
Yeah. Yes, but you challenged in your response. You challenged the voice.
Oh, the previous item.
So I thought you might want to know the facts. Perhaps I was wrong in that. Sorry. So we're now on the decision has already generated particular controversy, or in the opinion of the committee, it could do so. Well, it's evidently true that that's the case. We've received many representations from the residents and businesses showing the strength of the feeling.
So, Chair, can I just ask, what agenda item are we talking about? I feel like we might be in.
We don't go
an hour behind or something.
Well, there are 2 callings that we're talking about.
Yeah.
On the second one.
Second one, we're talking about.
Yes, this relates to the clean air zone revenues, but there is some overlap between the 2 in the sense that the criteria that we're referring to relate to both.
If I could just clarify, obviously some of the CAC revenues are going to the active travel measures that the traffic made looking into. So the point that Councillor Jenkins is making would be accurate and relevant, considering that the LTM
itself is deeply controversial.
I think it is relevant because
I don't want to obviously interrupt Councillor Jenkins' flow.
Okay, Councillor Jenkins, that you've got source the relevancy of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hope it's the report on the clean air zone, it allocated 3 million to the Kings Heath LTN, which was 23% of total funding available. So I think there is a certain amount of overlap. Anyway, the point being that on criteria 6, there was clearly controversy, and therefore that's grounds for calling. And point 7 of the criteria, there is a lack of substantial lack of clarity, material inaccuracy, or insufficient information provided to the report to allow the overview scrutiny committee to hold the executive to account. But this follows on from criteria 5 above, which you'll remember was that the executive overlooked some relevant consideration. So my point is that if the executive were not given the option to allocate the funding elsewhere, in other words, it was do this or do nothing, that then clearly there was a lack of clarity or insufficient information given to the executive. And then finally, again, point 8, criteria. So the decision appears to give rise to significant legal, financial, governance, or proprietary issue. Again, this follows on from that same point, that the executive are not meeting the most basic standards of good decision making. And we see in 2 separate cases, Anders Vinnick versus Foreign Compensation Commission and in Lightman versus the Director General of Telecoms, it's clear that the court may infer that if the director has taken into account an irrelevant consideration or failed to take into account a relevant consideration, then it would be grounds for reconsidering the decision. And those, Chair, are the criteria against which I believe this calling should be made.
Councillor Higgs, you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I pretty much concur with everything that Councillor Jenkins has raised, so I may be repeating a few points, but obviously in 3.2 of the Council's constitution, it sets out the principles of good decision making, which includes a proper consideration of available options. And of course, with this, only 2 options have been considered, which is do nothing or spend the money exactly as it has been set out. There's been no consideration in allocating the money in a different way. And of course, you don't have to agree with us that the money should be spent differently, but the omission from the report shows that the decision is unsound. And of course, as Councillor Jenkins has mentioned, one of the allocations of funding is towards the King's Heath LTN. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the King's Heath LTN again, because I think we've discussed that to death in the last part. But of course, it is controversial, and of course, the funding is going towards a controversial policy. And to carry on, the decision would give rise to significant legal, financial, governance, or proprietary issues, and that would, I repeat that, just because there hasn't been a due consideration of all the options. And of course, because there hasn't been any consideration of alternative options, you could argue that you haven't had sufficient information on the decision, and that would be a clear reason to vote for the call-in.
Respond, Councillor. Is it Clement or you want? Karen member? You respond?
Okay, yes, I'll respond to that, and I've got Steve Arnold here, my head of Clean Air Zone, who'll be supporting me in dealing with any detailed queries. But I have to say, having heard that, I'm a bit confused about what the reason for this call-in is. But again, just referring to what the process of a call-in is, you're calling in the recommendations, and the recommendations were to use these net surplus revenue from the CAB to support the objectives of the Birmingham Transport Plan, which we've just talked about at length, so I won't repeat that, and to promote public transport and active travel. So I think the reasons why we're doing that, the strategic imperative of doing those things, I think has already been, as I said, discussed at length, and I really emphasised that in the previous part of the meeting, and so I won't go over that again. And as regards the criteria that Councillor Marion Jenkins and Councillor Higgs have chosen to tick for the call-in pro forma, on the point of controversy, I have to be honest and say that I haven't received a single email from a resident about this. I did. There was some discussion about it in the Labour group, because obviously in a previous cabinet decision we agreed to have the local clean air fund, and I had some queries about that, and I've given reassurance to Labour councillors and all other councillors that we are moving ahead with the preparations for that, because that's where I think it will be possible to do some really innovative things on the ground and do local schemes to promote good air quality. But in relation to this specific cabinet report, I received no queries about it at all through email or social media. So I would say at the cabinet meeting of January, it was eclipsed by the report on mostly in King's Heath, and that's not to set any sort of hierarchy there, because to me this report is just as important, because the mission to clean up the air in Birmingham is about addressing a public health emergency. So that's the reason why we've got a clean air zone. And as I said in the cabinet meeting, the purpose of the clean air zone is to reach as quickly as possible compliance with the thresholds that we've got for air quality. It's not a revenue generating scheme, but if there is surplus revenue, the purposes for which the surplus revenue can be spent are set out in the charging order. So they're prescribed legally, and they are about doing the things that will promote better air quality in the city. So I mean, it's absolutely important, and it's absolutely consistent with all of the strategic policy priorities we've set in the Birmingham Transport Plan, the Route to Zero clean air strategy, and the wider clean air strategy for the city. I mean, on the governance question that's been raised about whether there should have been more than two options. We've got this senior solicitor here in the guise of Tom Dick, and he can comment. But I think in the discussions that I've had with Steve, when I was being briefed on this report, I think there's no requirement to have more than two options. It's nothing constitutionally, as far as I understand it. And the text of the report sets out the options that we're recommending and the reasons why we recommended them. And as I've said, the reason for recommending this package of measures is that those are the ones that will promote active travel, low emission travel, good options in public transport. And we had the question from Councillor Green, from Colin in the previous discussion about why we're not doing more to promote public transport. And one of the things in this report that I'm very keen on is that the options of looking at incentives, fair incentives on public transport. So those are the things where we can actually start to offer people real alternatives and make it possible to consider bus and rail travel, and particularly at the moment in a cost of living crisis. We need to ensure that public transport is cheap, and also in a cost of living crisis, the attractiveness of riding by bike is as long as you can have a bike, as long as you've got access to a bike, that is a cost-free way of travelling, as is walking. So I suppose I really don't understand the rationale for the call in or the reason cited, but perhaps Steve, I'll bring you in on the issue of the range of options question that's been raised by Councillor Jenkins in particular.
Sure. So the report itself, and it's important to remember that the report itself is recommending a series of allocations. Those allocations are all subject to a full business case, which is point 2.4 in the report. At 3.14, it also goes on to say that should those revenues be realised, and that's the consistent theme through all of these reports that have been recommending allocations to Cabinet, is that the funding will only be released at the point at which it is realised by the organisation. So that's through the generation. And the purpose of this report was to provide an update to Cabinet in terms of those net surplus revenues being generated by the scheme, recognising the allocations that had previously been allocated. And if you include the allocation that's been recommended in this report, if approved and if a suitable full business case goes through, that means that around about 31% of the total net surplus revenues allocated from the Clean Air Zone will be supporting public transport, either through improvements to train stations, hydrogen buses, cross-city bus. So there is a significant amount of money that's being invested from the Clean Air Zone scheme in terms of supporting the public transport network. I think that's all I'd say on that. I'd defer to Tandem in terms of as to whether or not there is a minimum number of options that we need to include.
Thank you, Chair. Are you happy for me to respond to that? Yeah, just one point I would make in terms of the legal requirements around the spend for net proceeds from the CAS. The report does state at paragraph 3.3 in the cabinet report as to what the legislation stipulates in terms of proceeds going towards the purpose of directly or indirectly facilitating the achievement of local transport policies of the authority. So clearly that's quite a broad remit. And then the order which introduced the clean air zone was also required to build on that, and it had in one of the appendices the 10-year general plan and the 5-year detail plan for the priorities for the spend of any net revenues. So that's just by way of context in terms of the legal requirements. And I think that's relevant in terms of the potential breadth of items towards which monies could be applied, because clearly local transport policies of the authority offers quite a broad remit. So then one of the considerations would be the practicalities of presenting a report which potentially set out a very lengthy list of all the things which could fall within that remit. I don't think that would be practical. In terms of there being a minimum number of options, there is no stipulated minimum. I think the more relevant consideration is that those being asked to make the decision should be able to make an informed decision in terms of the recommendations put before them. Now, obviously, the report did go on to set out into the alternative option of not supporting that, and clearly it was within the remit of Cabinet as a decision maker to take the view that the items of the areas of spending proposed weren't suitable in their opinion, and inviting officers of the service area to return with alternative areas of spend if they were of that view. So I think that hopefully answers the question in terms of what requirements are, but in terms of the overall picture as to what the authority is required to do with any net revenues arising from the CAS.
Right. So, open question. I think I had Colin.
Thank you. Councillor Clements. I accept everything that you've said. I want to ask a question about something that wasn't really said. The grounds for the call-in is that there were only two options. In fact, there was only one option. Do this good thing, do nothing. You've said that the surplus clean air zone money must be spent on a project to clean up the air quality in Birmingham, and that's great. Are you telling us that there was no other option, so that the choice wasn't between do this good thing or do that good thing?
Well, I think as I've explained to Steve, this is a package of measures that's being recommended, a package of allocations, and the different measures will be subject to business cases. And yes, I mean, I suppose in this, growing into this cabinet role, but in this cabinet role, I am listening to the advice of my officers about what are the appropriate things to use this revenue for. And TANDIP has focused our attention on paragraph 3.3, which tells us about how the purposes towards which the net proceeds can be used. And it's to facilitate the achievement of local transport policies. So we've already talked at length in this meeting about the Birmingham Transport Plan. In a way, I'm glad to have the opportunity to keep reiterating what's in that plan, but it's all about reallocating road space, creating 7 city centre segments in the city centre to stop through journeys in the city centre, creating places for people in our suburbs through low traffic approaches, and then the final element is parking demand management. And in this paper, we've set out a number of schemes that we want to implement using the financial support of the net surplus revenue. And they are, as Steve said, all about promoting public transport, looking at low emission vehicles, doing things like promoting car-free school streets, and all of the things which will enable people to make walking or cycling or using public transport their option of first choice. So I think there's a set of recommendations there, and in the report, Cabinet is asked to either decide to spend that money for that purpose or not to spend it. I think there's a danger of labouring this somewhat. I don't find that is difficult to understand as a set of options for the decision makers. And obviously, everyone in Cabinet gets the papers and reads them, and the Cabinet paper and the appendices, so gets a chance to reflect on that and ask any questions in advance of the meeting or at the meeting. So that's the process of making the decision.
So you're saying there were no other things that could be considered. The choice was purely do this or do nothing at all.
Again, I'm not quite sure why you're struggling with that, because we've got a transport, team of transport planners and people who have worked on the strategic framework, which is the transport plan, and they've worked out what the supporting measures are. And those are the activities that we're going to fund through the net surplus revenue. And obviously we could have an infinite list of things that we want to do, but in the end, using the available money, we've decided to offer these set of proposed schemes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yep. If I understand the reasons for the call in from Councillor Higgs and Councillor Jenkins, is that, as you've said, Cabinet Member, you probably didn't get any controversy over the Cabinet report, but some of the schemes within the Cabinet report, specifically those mentioned in 3.16.2, are controversial, and I'm sure that you have received numerous correspondence from a whole variety of sources about these schemes. So let me take you through 3.16.2. I know that there's been controversy over the city centre traffic cells, which is 3 million. I know there's been controversy over places for people delivery, King's Heath and Bourneville, as it says in 3.16.2, but possibly elsewhere, 3 million. I know from the press digest that we get as councillors about there's been controversy about the residents' parking scheme outside of the CAZ, and indeed only this week we had residents from Selly Park saying there was no need for such a scheme, and indeed not only was there no need for such a scheme because they did not have parking problems, but it would only add to the cost of living crisis because you'd be charging them money for residential permits to be part of that scheme. That was in the press this week. I'm sure you like other councillors, you read the press digest. So coming back to Councillor Higgs and Councillor Jenkins, it's not the controversy of the report itself, but it's the controversy of the schemes that the report says will be allocated funding, to which, if I can ask a question, is that what Councillor Jenkins and Higgs are actually saying? Right, okay, that's good. And then we go back, and I picked out the key phrase, it's the use of funding and the options that Councillor Green talked about. And let's look at some of the schemes in 3.11, because there are some very, very worthwhile schemes. And let's pick on some of the ones that we've already talked about, like the Clean Air City Fund to members, 20,000 per ward, 40,000 for 2 member wards. Was no consideration given to 30,000 per ward or 60,000 for 2 member wards, and actually start to reallocate funds more to the outside of the city centre and for members to take decisions about it themselves, because as we talked about from all sides yesterday, that local councillors are in a much better position to make decisions as to how to spend funding for the benefit of their own neighbourhoods and communities. Was there no thought given to a new station at Borsall Heath, for example, along the Camp Hill line? Because we're opening up Moseley Village, King's Heath, Pineapple Road. Why not Borsall Heath as well? The new station study commissioned by the West Midlands Rail Executive identified 4 stations in the West Midlands that has the potential to be reopened. They think there is a good business case for opening them. Borsall Heath was named as one of those 4 stations, Castle Bromwich being the other one in Birmingham. I know Castle Bromwich is in Solihull, but the station would technically be within the Birmingham Local Authority area. And then I look at 3.11 still, and I see, and the biggest by far allocation is 15.478 million for priority 2, which is city centre pedestrianisation and city centre public rail. How many times have we dug up Victoria Square in the last few years? I think it's either the 3rd or the 4th. Hasn't enough money being spent on city centre public realm to the detriment of money being spent in all the other wards across the city, all the other 68 wards, if you assume that Victoria Square is in Ladywood. Was no consideration given to other schemes? It was, as has been said, do nothing or use the funds as proposed. And the controversial nature that I've outlined of some of the schemes outlined 3.16.2, and as I say, if we introduce the cost of living crisis, then charging people to for residential permits where there is no problem in the first place, if we are to believe what the residents are saying in media, doesn't seem like a good source of funding.
Okay, I think I've got made myself a mental list of the points I think you were raising there. So just on the well, the first thing I want to say, just procedurally, what you're calling in is the recommendations of the report, which are at the beginning, I think it's in paragraph 2. So just to remind you of that. I'm a bit surprised that you focused on paragraph 3.11, because obviously if you've done close reading, the text there, the Cabinet has previously approved the allocation. So that list of projects has already been approved by Cabinet in 2021. So the allocation of 10,000 for a single member ward and 20,000 for a two-member ward. I think a decision's already been made about that. And I suppose, Nick, I'm not going to do that. No, sorry, I've listened to you at length, Tim, and I'm going to finish my contribution now. And I'm aware of the time because people presumably have other places to go to. You can see Alex looking at me. That decision's been made, and for me as the portfolio holder, what I'm most concerned now is actually that we have a report that comes to Cabinet with the guidance on how the funding can be used, and that we actually give members the chance to actually spend it. But there's no point sort of discussing that because that's a decision that was already made in 2021. That's finished. But what we're calling in is the recommendations in this report, and the report covers a number of proposals. And you listed all the ones that are controversial. And you've been, you are a predecessor in this role. You've been in the executive role, and you know that that you have to make decisions based on advice from officers. So the officers have looked at what serves the purposes of the Birmingham Transport Plan, our climate emergency response, and our wider clean air strategy. And this is the recommendations that they've come up with based on their expertise and their knowledge of what has worked and what will work in future. So just telling me that these decisions are controversial and for the separate schemes really is almost stating obvious, isn't it? Because I mean, in this leadership role to try and champion the transport plan, which is a revolutionary plan trying to change the whole the nature of mobility in the city, and to do that we are going to have to take some difficult decisions that not everyone is going to necessarily wholeheartedly support. And so we have to look at is what we're planning to do consistent with our strategies, but also, as Charlie has pointed out, is it actually permissible under the charging order? And I'm confident that the answer to both those propositions is yes. And on the recent controversy about the controlled parking zone in around Selly Park, I think a small number of residents have had their voices amplified in Birmingham Live this week, but actually if I look at what's in my inbox at the moment, I've got far more messages from people asking why that scheme of controlled parking zone has not progressed. It's really been kicking around for about 3 or 4 years now. So I am very, very keen to see that move on to implementation on the ground, because in that whole area, all the wards which surround the university and the UHB campus have real parking problems. And the residents find it very, very difficult to find places to park their cars. And so we're responding there, I think, to a need to manage parking in those areas.
I would, because I think if I heard the Cabinet member correctly, she said 10,000 per ward and 20,000 per two-member ward.
Yes, and it's effectively £10,000 per councillor, but 40,000 in a two-member ward. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you said 10 and 20. It's 20 and 40, and that's.
Okay, I apologise. That was the point.
That was the point I was trying to make, so that you hadn't cut our allocations by half.
No.
That was just a factual statement.
Fine.
Again, but thank you for picking me up on that, because that's part of the reason why I'm keen to get on with this, because this is, a much more significant amount of money than the other small pot that we have available to us as local members, for transport measures. The ward minor transport measures, as you know, is the 10,000 and 20,000 figures. That's probably the confusion that I've got into in describing this. But my fundamental point is that the allocation of 20,000 per councillor, which ends up with a 40,000 allocation for a 2-member ward, that has already been decided. So the purpose of today's meeting is not to go over that again, because that decision has been made 18 months ago.
Well, I was going to make, but just because the decision has been made, it doesn't stop consideration of actually increasing it to, for example, 1360. It doesn't stop it.
Yes.
So,
He wants to come in.
So, apologies. So, yes, you're absolutely correct. However, the scheme is unproven at the moment in terms of its impact, and therefore I think it is appropriate that, based on the allocation that's been supported by Cabinet, that we deliver the scheme as it's been defined, test it, see whether or not it does deliver the expected benefits. If it does, as this report already says, there is the potential for future revenues in future years arising from this scheme. Those future revenues would all be subject to a future Cabinet report, all reports recommending further allocations. The other thing I would add as well, just to support this as well, is that the work around the transport plan, in particular the delivery plan to support the transport plan, is in progress at the moment. So the expectation will be that some of the things, the schemes that fall out of that will be supported, will receive some level of support from the Clean Air Zone Fund, not the Clean Air Zone Fund, the Clean Air Zone Net Surplus revenues in order to make them possible.
Thank you, Chair. I think just more of a kind of couple of observations and concerns on the previous item. Felt very valid and genuine, and in terms of how I voted on it, kind of left up to the last minute. And in the end, the only reason I voted the way I did is because I think it didn't quite meet the criteria. And there was a very healthy discussion about it that focused on the kind of the process, the procedures, and also the kind of issue as well. This, I've got to be honest with members opposite, doesn't feel in the same vein. It feels like it's almost a kind of proxy to kind of make more sort of public comments about the LTN, and feels a little bit more opportunistic, if I'm honest. And I think that was kind of got off on the wrong foot, Councillor Jenkins, by, in your very first sentence, misnaming the Clean Air Zone the travel tax. And I think that this just doesn't feel like it meets any of the criteria. It doesn't feel like a serious debate, if I'm completely honest, whereas the last one really was, and was really good and healthy, and this doesn't.
Right, so move on to Martin.
Yeah, a question to Councillor Clements. I understand that when you're making the Cabinet decisions, you're looking at a list of possible projects. But to what extent did you interrogate the extent to which they actually met the priorities of the Birmingham travel plan, for instance? And I'll just give one example, and people might be bored with me giving this example, but we went on a visit just in December to the new university station, and I think it's true to say that members that were there, despite the presentation that was given by the rail executive in relation to modal splits and active travel, that really very little consideration had been given by the rail executive to, for instance, cycling and safe storage of cycles at that station. Virtually none, actually. And the only response that we got was, well, we're learning lessons from this station, and we may, in terms of the King's Heath line, we may learn from it. And I think that was a bit disappointing. And my concern, it may not be directly relevant to the calling, but my concern is you've got two big institutions there at that station. Obviously the university and the hospital trust. They've got exactly what they wanted out of that station. We've put in getting on for 4 million, 3.8 million? 3.4, okay, plus 500,000 on something else. Yeah. Fair amounts of cash. And I'm just not convinced how we've influenced what was done there.
I think you're right, Councillor Brooks, that what the concern about the university station isn't directly relevant, because although it's captured in the paragraph which talks about the previous allocations, it's not, that is a decision that's already been made to allocate funding to that state, to university station. Yes, it's paragraph 3.11. I mean, I share your frustration there because I cycle past the building project at University Station several times a week on my commutes into the city centre, and I think we do need to put pressure on the rail executive and their contractors to look at better cycling facilities, because if you think the whole direction that we're going in through having constructed the A38 cycle route and looked at various other measures is to try and get a mode shift for the employees of the university and also the UHB trust, to get them onto their bikes and walking or using public transport. And you and I have been for a meeting with the Sustainable Travel Coordinator at the university on precisely that theme. And I hope we can follow up with representatives of UHB Trust. But the recommendations in this report, which are about future use of the CAS revenue, net surplus revenue, do not include any other new funding for University Station.
A real question wasn't what the university were doing or what the hospital trust were doing, but how we had used our CAS money to actually influence what we want in terms of the Birmingham Transport Plan. And I don't think we have.
Well, I suppose in relation to the university station, as you know, Councillor Brooks, there is at the moment a covered bike storage area on the plaza between the station and the road where you cross over to the hospital. So my expectation would be that there would be at least that level of cycle parking in the station when it's complete, if not more. Separately, we're pursuing the development of bike hangars and other forms of storage across the city. So it's very much at the forefront of what we're doing. And as somebody who does cycle, I know that having somewhere that's secure to leave your bike is absolutely crucial, because if you're afraid all the time your bike's going to be stolen, that is a significant barrier to using bike as an everyday form of transport.
No, therefore I think could ask the officers to leave now again, and we'll. Okay. Right. Colleagues, what do you think on this one?
Well, I would like to make a comment, and just picking up on Councillor Brooks's point, is that if we sent it back to the executive and said we've got to get more bang for our buck in terms of future allocations of CAZ surplus revenues, they need to think and consult more widely about what we actually get from the surplus funds generated in terms of public transport. And I would support a call-in based on that and that alone.
Right, in that case, I'll vote show of hands. Those in favour of the call-in?
Based on the fact that there are clearly other things that could be done with the Clean Air Zone money, and that Councillor Clements couldn't name a single one, it seems that the decision was predetermined. She has a list of things that she wants to be done, and would only give another option as being do nothing at all.
And she said that the parameters are got to be done with the.
There are no end of things that could be done within the list of parameters. There is lots that can be done in this city and needs to be done in this city to clean up air quality.
And outside the city centre.
100% right. Couldn't agree more.
But doesn't, sorry, well, I certainly don't disagree with the sentiment of that. I just don't see, like, trying to stick to this kind of logically, how this meets the criteria for a call-in. Just because we would prefer that it was something else, I don't think that's reason enough to call in a decision.
I'm not saying that I prefer another scheme. The decision was predetermined because they put forward what they wanted with no other option other than, as yes, Prime Minister might say, an option that you couldn't choose.
Which therefore goes to the basis of, is the executive's decision well founded in terms of it has overlooked some relevant consideration, as in other options. That is the relevant consideration. There were other options. Yeah. They decided not to look at that other options and to give either do as we say or nothing at all, which is really.
But then just to come in on that again, though. But then again, just the fact that there are other options. There are other options for every single decision the council makes. We'd be calling in everything. And I'm not one who's doing this just because it's for example, it's a Labour council decision or a Labour cabinet decision. I've issued call-ins myself of Labour decisions, so it's nothing like that. I just think that it's not strong enough to call it in. It's just not. It's tenuous at best. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree on that basis. I think there's a lot of speculation coming from some people that isn't grounded in reality. And the truth is that it could have been rejected, as in the last call-in. There was opposition, which then led to a reconfiguration idea, and then again. So based on the fact that we've just seen that process happen, I don't think this one meets the criteria. It could have been given something else. And also there's a lot of things in the package put forward. So I don't think it meets the criteria either.
Sorry. Just off one comment. In terms of the phrase predetermination, that means something quite specific in the context of decision making in local government, and it's a judgment as to what's in the mind of the decision maker at the point of the decision being made, not in terms of the options presented by those who are inviting the decision. So a lot of what I'm hearing seems to be that the report didn't present enough options, but as far as the decision maker was concerned, they clearly did have the option, if they were so inclined, not to support the recommendations. Now, I acknowledge that there weren't alternative areas of spend proposed, and there wasn't a shopping list that the decision maker could, select in terms of its priorities. But in terms of the threshold of predetermination, that's quite a high threshold and it's quite specific in terms of what the decision maker thinks at the point of the decision, whereas most of the discussion or the assertion being made seems to be that the options presented by those inviting the decision weren't broad enough. So I think there's a distinction that needs to be made there, and I would, as a consequence of that, query whether it actually meets the description of predetermination. So I just invite members to have regard to that in terms of what decision they arrive at.
Well, I've never used that exact word. I've said they have overlooked some relevant consideration. I've not used the words predetermination.
I agree. In that respect,
you did. I'm pretty sure you did. On a number of occasions.
We've got VAR.
Okay.
Yeah. On that point, in terms of the relevant consideration, that was the reason why I took members back to the part of the report which sets out the parameters of what CAS revenues can and can't be spent on, because I think in many ways that's the more important question in terms of is what's being proposed as a spend compliant with the requirements as set out in the legislation and as embellished in the CAS order. And I think that's probably the more important question in a way. when a decision maker is deciding whether to support the spend that's proposed.
So in your legal opinion, the decision maker has fulfilled the obligation to meet the legal criteria for the spend?
Well, I think just looking at it objectively, obviously I'm not here to influence the outcome, and I'm not here to support the decision that was made. In terms of the report, it clearly set out what the legal parameters are in terms of what money can and can't be spent on. And then in terms of the decision itself, yes, the report put forward some recommendations in terms of proposals for spend, but it's not necessarily a given that Cabinet would have to go along with them. The Cabinet had the option not to support the recommendations before them. So I think that's an important consideration when asking whether it amounts to a predetermination or whatever you choose to call it.
Just a clarification then, if this decision is called in, are the only two options that could be made by reconsidering the two options that are listed, this set of spending or nothing?
Well, in terms of the remit, obviously the remit is to invite Cabinet as decision maker to reconsider that same decision.
To reconsider only those two options?
Well, in terms of any comments that you might put back, let's say you were to call it in, you could make comments that you think it would be healthy for Cabinet to be presented with alternative options.
That's what I would think.
But we have two options in the available to us now. We either have to stay in the calling and let the Cabinet decide, or we don't call it in, but send a letter of so.
To clarify, if you choose not to call it in, you can choose not to call it in and that's the end of it, or you can choose not to call it in, but to write a letter to the Cabinet member outlining any concerns that you may have picked up in previous conversations. So you do have that option in the framework.
Okay. Yeah. So I prefer that option. That's be more amicable in the sense that we will send a letter of concern to the Cabinet member, bearing in mind
Chair, from a governance perspective, I would just point out, obviously, the decision that has been made is a fairly kind of high-level decision. What will follow on in terms of governance is a series of further reports which would have the detailed approvals to each of those sort of schemes and areas of spend, and they, in themselves, would provide further detail about what the monies are proposed to be spent on.
So basically, the concept stage anyway.
Yes, yeah. Clearly, a broad allocation has been made at this stage in terms of the Cabinet decision to certain policy objectives or schemes that fall within that sort of umbrella. But in terms of individual schemes that comprise each of those components, they would need to go through each of their governance process. So at that stage, there would clearly be further detail.
I think Cabinet member did, and the officer did tell us that. But I think if the committee feels better, then we still send a letter off through the Cabinet member that taking our views into consideration. So that you are also happy that you don't have this do nothing option or do this only. So that in that way the Cabinet member will put on the spot to make sure that we have the option given to all of us.
The letter to the Cabinet member would have a lot less impact on the decision. But on the grounds that it's an outline decision, not a specific decision, I'm happy to go.
So if I recall the procedure right, is that we have to take a vote on the issue anyway. Mm-hmm. I would still like to call the decision in on the basis I think it's got a strength to it.
Yes.
But if the committee doesn't decide to call the decision in, I would be very supportive of writing that letter. Is that the correct procedure?
So,
okay, so
yes,
we need to do a vote.
Yeah.
And then on the basis of the vote, then you will need to make a decision on your next
Oh.
steps.
Right, those in favor of the calling? Those against? Right, therefore, calling is not sustained. So, but we will agree that send a letter to the cabinet member, and now, I think we have, so you can say, what do you want in the letter?
I think it, I think it, again, as I said, I think councillor Brooks has made a very fair point that where we spend CA's said surplus funds, what is the procedure to make sure that we get the most out of them that meets the objectives of the clean air zone? And that
we are running a lot later than planned.
Yes, I've got it on it.
Would it be possible to maybe email the members and ask us to feed in anything for a letter rather than do it right now? Okay.
Not meeting the committee. What we can do is draft something.
Yeah.
And then we
Send
can
it on
tinker with
it.
the wording,
Yeah.
but we need to
Yeah,
agree the
yeah.
reason.
and we're meeting next week, so we could discuss it next week. The draft of the letter.
Yeah.
If you just wanted to confirm.
Okay, so any further you would?
I'm just kind of happy to support that in particular that was kind of raised by councillor Brooks and then formally from councillor Hudson.
Right. Further? Okay, that's fine, I said that. These, the dates of next, date and time of next meeting, which is next Wednesday, which is February 2 p.m. Any requests for call in? Anyone?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Call in
None?
decision not to call in.
Any other business? No, none. Authority for the chair to, not to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
So will we stop the streaming?
Could you hang on, please? We'll wait till the